everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Elevating Property Management. I'm Colin Douthit. I'm here today with Max Fitzgerald from Craft and Bauer out of Los Angeles, California. Thank you for being here, Max.
Thanks for having me, Colin.
So, we've been talking briefly, but can you kind of give everybody a rundown on your history and obviously your great success in the real estate industry?
So I have been a licensed real estate agent for about 7 years. And I got started in real estate very untraditionally. I didn't think I was going to end up in real estate after college. It wasn't one of my passions, but I ended up meeting and kind of jiving with someone who was a couple of years older at me at the time, but he was really a one-man show. He held his broker's license, but he was also developing homes in Los Angeles. He was doing actually a lot of property management. He owned a lot of units in South Central.
Okay.
And was just kind of a jack of all trades. So I hitched my wagon to him as his unpaid intern and got into real estate that way. And was, I kind of got going early on in real estate by sort of just figuring it out, but got really gravitated towards the multifamily industry. I realized that multifamily principals and buyers really didn't care where the deal came from as long as it was a good deal. So I kind of found my niche in just being really good at underwriting multifamily buildings and covered land plays and things like that were just basically numbers based. And built up a database of buyers pretty quickly that way. So that was sort of my foundational start in real estate. And then I, about 2.5 years ago, I got my broker's license and I started my own residential real estate brokerage in January of 2019. And we've grown it to about 30, we're actually now at 36 agents. We have a group of agents in Southern California, a group of agents in Northern California, and then we actually have a handful in Arizona. So we're starting to spread our wings into that market. That's my background in a nutshell, Colin.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing that, Max. And kudos to you for taking the last 2 years or year and a half to build such a large firm. And how old are you again?
I am 32.
32. All right. I'm 33, very soon going on 34. So we're right there in that same, let's start a company in 2019 and ride it out through the first pandemic in 100 years type thing.
That's right.
Yeah.
A wild ride, to say the least.
Absolutely. So, we're here talking mainly about property management. So wanting to focus on the value that property management can bring to, the industry as a whole, to investors once, the property is already owned, but also, during the due diligence process, during the farming of deals, if you will. So, with your experience, you underwrote a lot of deals, helped a lot of people buy a lot of units. So, what was your experience with property managers, kind of going through that process as on the buy side?
Yeah, that's a good question. So when I first got started, I was acting as the property manager. My broker at the time, he probably owned about 20 units, so a very small portfolio compared to probably a lot of your listers. But he owned 20 units and he was kind of self-managing it himself. I would say of those 20 units or so, probably 75% were Section 8. And they were all kind of in the hood in South Central and Inglewood and in the sketchier parts of Los Angeles. So my first job was driving around town and posting a lot of not so nice notices to these tenants. It was a very inefficient way of conducting property management, but I did learn a lot from a tenant landlord perspective. No systems in place. We managed a lot of things on spreadsheets. Okay. But then when I started working with more institutional buyers, especially those kind of buying at scale in Los Angeles, it was a mixed batch of my experience with those sorts of property managers. I would say a lot of the institutional guys are farming their PM needs out to local property managers in the area. So when I would sell an apartment building to a buyer, I would be looped in with their property manager and just kind of facilitate the all the transfers of everything, everything between property manager and tenant. So I was kind of more the boots on the ground type of person, but you'd be surprised. I mean, a lot of the bigger guys still run a very inefficient way of conducting their business when it comes to property management because they don't have a lot of things in-house. So it feels a little scatterbrained because they'll have a different property manager in Southern California than they do in Utah, than they do in Florida, right? So it's just a lot of cooks in the kitchen. I think, and I'm not very well versed in property management, but I think the people that do it best are the ones that kind of self-manage and have a consistent platform across their territories or states or wherever they own their buildings.
Yeah, yeah. We've we've talked to some people that self-manage, and a lot of those people are going to be that we see are large institutional investors with hundreds of millions of dollars behind them, possibly billions, or they're LIHTC developers, or they're using Section 42 because the qualification process and all the reporting and documentation so onerous, it drives the cost of property management through the roof. So when you were helping people buy, were you ever helping just, a regular guy or a group of syndicators buy, a small apartment complex around LA?
Yeah, definitely. And that's where I would say I sort of got my start as I transitioned away from being the boots on the ground person for my broker, and started working with a lot of people sort of my age, maybe late 20s, early 30s, who are maybe starting a syndication fund, who maybe had hopes of buying 15 units or so across maybe 2 or 3 properties.
Okay.
So very small portfolios, but they were all basically self-managing. They were not utilizing the services of a PM until they hit more of a scale.
Okay, gotcha. When you would, work and, there was units changing hands and, say there was professional property management in place or quote unquote professional property management, there was a property management company in place and then they were transitioning to you guys, what was the best value or what were you seeing that was really good on those property managers that made the transition easy or made the properties operate well?
During the transition, having either the handyman or the contractor at, walking the unit and getting those bids very quickly. I think the biggest hang up with that sort of transfer of service, if you will, is the lag time between when a tenant vacates, when the GC or the contractor can walk the unit, when they can get the bids back to the principal, when the principal can approve things, when they can. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of moving parts that just take away from the occupancy of that vacant unit. So mm-hmm. the best one is, the best companies operate by tenant vacates, contractors in there the next day or two, walks it, gets the bid over to the principal, and then they kind of turn the work around within a week or so of the tenant vacating. Mm-hmm. And it's just a well-oiled machine. You get the most hang up when there's just a lot of miscommunication, when the property management company isn't on the ball so much, doesn't know where the guys on the ground are. Yeah. So that's, and a lot of the people that I work with, I have to be sort of responsible somewhat of mm-hmm. the people doing the work. So a lot of that responsibility falls on me, and I can tell you that's by far the most frustrating thing from a principal's perspective when mm-hmm. when dealing with managers.
Gotcha. Well, I'm kind of glad you brought some of those things up because a lot of investors, right, a lot of affluent people that are investing right now, of course, there's people throughout the whole country, but in the Midwest, we're seeing a lot of money from the coasts coming in here because just the cost of purchasing stuff is a lot lower. And, you're talking about, okay, well, the PM's got to get the contractor and there's all these different steps to making that happen. What we try to do as a value proposition to the investors, especially the out-of-state ones, is say, okay, well, we've got our property management company, Atlas Property Management. We have our own maintenance staff. And we also have our own construction company called Atlas Construction. We have that all in-house. So, okay, the tenant moves out, we have our move-out inspection within a day or two. We get that move-out inspection report to our maintenance team. They do security deposit items. If we're going to turn the unit with a heavy turn, construction's in there getting an estimate, right? Our own construction crew is giving an estimate, get it approved, and then our crews go and do it. So we're not having to jockey with all of these different, people to try and coordinate and try to shrink that time period from vacating to relisting. So
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you guys have a great operation, because that's exactly, and I'm sure everyone sort of listening will agree with you that that's the best way to sort of run a property management business. And if I was a landlord, I'd be very intrigued with that. So that sounds great.
yeah, and that's good to know that was some of your biggest struggles because especially dealing with out of state investors, they're not right there. I don't know if a lot of your investors were local, where they could kind of be present with the property, but so many of our people are from out of town that we're having to communication is really important.
Yeah, and the reason that a lot of the bigger companies that I've worked with in the past utilize local property managers is just because California and Los Angeles specifically, it's a very tenant friendly state. So outside of the move in, move out sort of logistics, when you have to notify tenants, when you have to, post a 48-hour notice of entry, you do really have to be aware of the tenant landlord laws to be compliant with the tenants and how you're conducting your business from a management or ownership perspective. So if you hire someone out of state or out of the area who may be unfamiliar with the local tenant landlord laws in Los Angeles, it could create inefficiencies. It could create potentially legal problems. So it may be a regional thing why a lot of people just kind of choose to use the regional guys out here, but
Yeah, I mean,
but I'm sure it's the same in your area where there's
yeah,
nuance.
every state, every city's got its own, rules and regulations that you have to abide by. Of course, ours are going to be about half of what you guys have to deal with at a minimum. So, because you guys are very, very heavy with your rules and regulations.
Oh yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So aside from, streamlining the turn process, when, somebody was acquiring something, they were bringing on their own property management firm, right? So they were kind of the buyer's PM firm during the due diligence process or the contract period. What did you see the PM firms that you thought were doing it best? What were they doing maybe that some other firms weren't doing?
Just kind of goes back to what I was saying originally. I mean, the ones that do it best do it all in house, and where the principal doesn't have to pick up the phone and say, "Hey, what's going on? Why has this unit been vacant for 2.5 weeks? What are you guys doing?" I would just sort of reiterate that sort of sentiment.
Okay.
That's what I think a good property manager is doing best. And
Mhm.
and for everyone that's listening, I'm property management is not totally my expertise, so I'm trying to answer these questions as best as I can from a slightly different perspective outside of the industry. But that would sort of be my answer there.
Yeah, no, and we do appreciate the fact that you're not in the industry, so you're kind of looking at it with different eyes. Because
Yeah.
if we talk to investors, they're all going to have kind of maybe the same general complaints across the board. Or we're talking to other PM firms and like, yeah, this is what we do that's best. But somebody that's been, more on the transactional side, and you're walking through a purchase or a sale of an investment property, and you're like, oh man, these property managers aren't doing anything, and you see it kind of crashing and burning, or these are coming in, hey, this PM's on the board. They're doing lease audits. They're making sure security deposits are getting transferred correctly. They're doing,
Right.
paying attention to these details, and you're like, okay, that firm, they've got it together, right? But you're not actually in the, minutia of dealing with a PM firm on a daily basis, and you're not, involved in a PM firm. So it's nice to have a perspective for somebody that had a different involvement in it.
Yeah, and it's something that we talked about before we started recording here, is that we've all had if you're not in the real estate industry or the property management industry, it's probably hard for you to recognize what a good property management company does day in and day out. I can bet your bottom dollar what a bad one does, because we've all been in probably really terrible situations with landlords or with companies that just don't return your calls or don't fix anything, or it's just a hassle to get your security deposit back. So I think if you're not in our industry, a good property management company could be considered one that you just don't really pay attention to, because you don't have to worry about anything. Everything is just so streamlined.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe that's an angle that that some people may be taking.
Yeah, no, and if you're not in the industry, you just tend to hear horror stories about property management companies that aren't repairing stuff, or it's a mom and pop owner operator and they're changing locks because you're behind on rent, or violating 6 or 7 different laws, and they're just kind of shooting from the hip, or their, rent collection process is terrible, or they're way behind on raising rents, so you're coming in, you're with the buyer, right? You're representing the buyer, and the buyer's like, well, these rents are 20% under market value. Why is that? And it's like, well, it's a mom and pop operator that was afraid to raise rents. We kind of hinted to the, some of the vertical integration, to keeping as much of it in-house as possible. I'll just ask, I guess, my standard question, we kind of already hit it, but, is what is one thing that property managers can do to professionalize and elevate the profession of property managers as a whole?
To be good at their jobs.
Okay.
Is that a good answer? I mean,
it's simple and concise.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's such a varied industry, man. It's just really, if you're, a lot of my people that buy in new states need recommendations to property managers. That's really tough, because it's just like real estate. It's just like the industry that I'm in on the residential side here in Los Angeles, right? There's really great real estate agents and there's really terrible ones. But the ones that do their job the best are usually the ones that, get the most referrals and get the most business. So the ones that do their job the best are the ones that should be recognized for that success. And I think this platform that you've created, this podcast, is a really great way to get the word out that, there are subtle differences between property management companies, both maybe subtle is the wrong word. There are huge differences between property management companies. And this is a great way to sort of educate the audience that, hey, this is a really eclectic industry, and we want to try and separate ourselves from the masses, because there are companies that are just doing things the wrong way, or just inefficient and not vertically integrated. So the more that you can kind of put those sort of companies and groups of people in the spotlight, the more it's going to just elevate your industry as a whole. So I think what you're doing here, Colin, is really great. And, I just wanted to kind of show you that love.
No, I appreciate it, Max. And thank you for the kind words. And it's a very eclectic industry with a ton of different players in it, just like a lot of industries. But it's one that from the very beginning, I've always felt like the bar for success and being good was set so low that it's like, we could really be good at our jobs and stand out head and shoulders above a lot of other companies, because the average PM has such a bad rap, or they're just not performing well.
I mean, that's exactly why I wanted to start a residential real estate brokerage, because the barrier to entry to be a real estate agent in California it's a joke. I mean, you have to take 3 online tests, and once you pass those, then you go and take the state test, which is only 100 questions, multiple choice. So it's not very hard to get your real estate license, but the rate of failure for people getting into real estate in California is close to 90%. So it's a tricky industry to navigate. But when I started my brokerage, I just quickly realized that there was just so many inefficiencies in California with real estate brokerages, even the big ones like Compass and Keller William. The more I'm basically on recruiting calls with agents almost every day, so I'm hearing the good, the bad, and the ugly in my industry, and just learning that a lot of people want to change brokerages for different reasons, but there are tons and tons of inefficiencies that the big guys are just doing completely wrong. So even though we're a very small company, we have found our niche and have just tried to be as the most efficient and forward-thinking company as we possibly could. So there's a lot of gray space in our industry, and it sounds like there's a lot of gray space in property management. I think that's where our two worlds sort of collide.
No, I think that's 100% right. So, well, I wish you continued success growing your brokerage firm. I really thank you so much for your time. If people are in your area there in California or parts of Arizona, what's the best way that people can get a hold of you?
Probably either by email. My email is max, M-A-X, @craftbauer.com, or on Instagram. I'm on Instagram a ton, and I try and share as much as I can from a business perspective. And my handle is max.fitzgerald on Instagram. So.
Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Max. I appreciate a fresh set of eyes on the property management world from a different perspective. So thanks for sharing that with us today.
Cool. No problem. Thanks for having me on, Colin.